The ball that crossed the line the sun was high in the sky, casting long golden rays across the quiet suburban street. A bird chirped nearby. The neighborhood was calm, picture-perfect, the kind of place where everything seemed peaceful, at least, from the outside. But change was coming, and it would begin with something as small as a bouncing basketball. Ethan Carter was 12 years old. He had only been living in the neighborhood for a few weeks. His mother, Lisa Carter, had moved them into the white-painted house at the end of Maplewood Drive after her re-election as the state's governor. It was a beautiful two-story home with a big yard, white steps, and a view of the park. Ethan didn't care much about the view. What he loved was the small basketball hoop nailed above their garage. Every afternoon after school, he came outside with his favorite orange basketball and practiced shots. He wasn't trying to be famous or impress anyone. It was just something that made him feel good. The rhythm of bouncing the ball, the sound of it swishing through the net, it was like music that afternoon. Like every other, Ethan stood in his driveway, bouncing the ball, practicing moves he saw on YouTube. His curly hair bounced with every step, his smile wide. He wore a red t-shirt, black shorts, and high-top sneakers that were a little too big for him. He had earned them with good grades. His mom was proud. As he dribbled and spun, the ball suddenly bounced hard against the pavement and rolled away. It didn't go far, just across the narrow street. It rolled slowly into the green yard of the house directly across from his. Ethan jogged over and stood at the edge of the grass. He looked around. The house was quiet, curtains drawn. He didn't want to cause trouble, so he called out politely, "Hello? Excuse me?" My ball rolled over. No one answered. He took a cautious step forward and grabbed the ball. It was just lying there in the grass, not even close to the porch. He didn't even make it 3 steps onto the lawn. Just a kid retrieving his toy, but someone was watching. From behind the curtain on the second floor, Karen Thompson narrowed her eyes. Her hand gripped her phone tightly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She was a woman who noticed everything on the block. At least that's how she saw it. In her mind, she was protecting her neighborhood, watching for anything unusual. And today, to her, Ethan Carter looked unusual. Her eyes didn't see a polite, respectful kid. Her eyes didn't see a child at all. She saw suspicion. She saw danger. She picked up her phone. Her voice was calm but cold as she told the dispatcher, "Yes, there's a black kid in my yard. I don't know what he's doing, but he's walking around like he owns the place. Looks like he's checking things out. Please send someone." Her voice didn't shake, it didn't crack. She believed she was right. Across the street, Ethan had already picked up his basketball and was walking back to his house. The sun was still shining. The street still looked peaceful. But that was about to change. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights sliced through the quiet. Sirens shattered the calm. A police cruiser came speeding down the block and screeched to a halt right in front of Ethan's driveway. Neighbors peeked through curtains and cracked open doors. Ethan stood frozen. His fingers gripped the ball tightly. His heart started pounding. 2 officers stepped out of the car. Their belts clinked with every step. One of them placed his hand near his holster, not drawing his weapon, but not relaxed either. "Hey, son," the taller officer said. His voice was even. "Can you tell us what you're doing?" Ethan blinked. He wasn't sure if he heard right. I was just getting my basketball," he said. His voice was soft, unsure. Before he could explain further, Karen Thompson came out of her house. Her arms were crossed. Her face looked like she'd been proven right. "That's him," she pointed. "He was snooping around my yard. I told you he looked suspicious? These kids don't just walk into people's lawns for no reason." "I wasn't snooping," Ethan whispered, but no one heard. The officers turned to him. "Were you trespassing?" "No, sir." "My ball rolled over. I just picked it up," Karen scoffed. "That's what they always say." They that word. Heavy, ugly. Ethan's hands trembled. His basketball felt heavier than ever. His feet felt like they were stuck to the driveway. The officer sighed and glanced at his partner. "We'll need to take you in for a few questions." "What?" Ethan took a step back. "But I didn't do anything, just for questioning," the officer repeated. "It's routine. Do you want to call your parents?" Ethan nodded. Silent. He could barely hold his phone. He pressed the first number in his favorites. Mom. Inside the governor's office, Governor Lisa. Carter was in a meeting about educational reform when her phone vibrated. She normally didn't check it during meetings, but something made her glance down. Incoming call. Ethan, she excused herself and stepped into the hallway. When she picked up, she heard it immediately, her son's fear. Mom, they said. I trespassed, but I just went to get my ball. Her heart stopped. Who? She asked calmly, though her spine turned to ice. The police. They came. A lady across the street called them. She said I looked suspicious. Lisa didn't need to hear more. She didn't shout. She didn't panic, but her voice dropped like a blade. Stay there, I'm coming. She hung up and turned to her security team. Car, now. Her team, already used to her urgency, moved fast. Within minutes, a black SUV convoy was tearing down the highway. Lisa sat in the back seat, her hands folded. Her face didn't show emotion, but her mind was racing. She wasn't just a mother. She was the mother governor of the entire state, and someone had just accused her son of being a criminal for retrieving a ball back on Maplewood Drive. The neighbors were murmuring now. Some had come out of their homes. Others were filming on their phones. A few were whispering that maybe it was all a mistake. Karen Thompson stood tall, arms folded, unmoved. Ethan stood beside the police cruiser, silent, small. Then, the sound of more sirens. Not police. Something different. Black SUVs. Several. Windows. Tinted. Flags attached. They pulled up fast, precise, and powerful. Doors swung open and out stepped Governor Lisa Carter. Karen's face paled. The officers stood straighter. The crowd hushed. Lisa didn't say anything at first. She walked toward her son. He dropped his ball and ran to her. She hugged him tightly. Then she stood tall and faced the officers. What? She asked, her voice sharp as lightning. Is happening here? The taller officer cleared his throat. We were called about a suspicious person. This boy, your son was reported for being in someone's yard. Lisa turned her gaze to Karen, who was already shifting on her feet. Was it you? Lisa asked. Karen nodded. I didn't know who he was. He was in my yard. I thought he might be up to something. Like what? Lisa asked. Did he steal something? No. Did he damage property? No. Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried across the entire street. Then why did you call the police on a child? Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. Lisa turned to the crowd. This is my son, she said. 12 years old, straight A student, loves basketball. Never caused trouble, and yet today he was treated like a criminal. Not because of what he did, but because of how he looks. The street was silent, except for one sound, a basketball. Slowly, rolling across the pavement. Sirens, silence, and a child's fear the moment Lisa Carter, governor, mother, protector, spoke those first cold words. The energy in the neighborhood shifted. The air, once filled with murmurs and judgment, turned heavy with accountability. The eyes that once watched Ethan with suspicion now watched Lisa with stunned silence. Yet none of it mattered to Ethan in that moment. As he stood beside his mother, clutching her arm, he wasn't thinking about cameras or crowds or politics. He was thinking about the lump in his throat, the hot burn in his chest, and the fear that even his innocence could be taken from him. With a single phone call, he had never been arrested, never even spoken back to a teacher. He had always done what was right. But none of that mattered now. One basketball. One step into a yard. That's all it took for the world to see him as something he was not. The officers, now painfully aware of the identity of the woman standing before them, stiffened under her gaze. The taller one, Officer Brooks, tried to recover, but the apology caught in his throat. Governor Carter, he began, but Lisa raised one hand to silence him. Her face, still unreadable, carried the weight of something deeper than angered disappointment. Disappointment in the system, in the assumptions, in the way this neighborhood had failed her son before even knowing his name. She turned toward Karen Thompson, the woman still rooted in her driveway, face pale, eyes wide. Karen, once filled with smug certainty, now looked like a child caught lying in church. "Do you know what you've done?" Lisa asked, her voice low, steady, like a storm still gathering. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Lisa continued, "You looked out your window, saw a black boy pick up a basketball, and decided. He was dangerous. You didn't ask. You didn't speak to him. You just picked up your phone and made him feel like a criminal in his own neighborhood." Karen flinched, her eyes flicking to the officers, the crowd, the neighbors who now looked at her differently. I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't recognize him." "I thought—" "No," Lisa interrupted, sharper now. "You didn't think. You assumed? You saw a child and made him a threat? And you didn't just assume. You escalated. You called the police. You brought sirens and guns and fear to a boy who just wanted his basketball." Her voice didn't rise, but every word hit like a hammer. The silence was deafening. The neighborhood, once a place of painted fences and weekend barbecues, now stood as a reflection of everything it didn't want to admit. Bias, assumption, fear. Ethan said nothing. He stood close to his mother, eyes darting across faces that once smiled at him as he rode his bike, now frozen with shame or silence. In that silence, a part of Ethan changed. Something small but real, a piece of his innocence chipped away. For the first time, he realized that being good, being kind, being respectful, none of that guaranteed safety. Not when people saw your skin before your smile. Not when a mistake wasn't treated like a mistake, but like a threat. The basketball he once loved now sat forgotten in the grass, its orange surface dulled by dust. He didn't want to touch it. Not anymore, the officers shifted uneasily. Officer Brooks took a step forward. "Governor Carter, we apologize. The call came through dispatch. We responded based on protocol." His voice tried to be respectful, but it couldn't mask the defensiveness underneath. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "Protocol," she repeated. "Is that what you call it when a child is surrounded by armed officers for stepping 3 feet onto a lawn?" "Protocol?" Brooks swallowed, his voice smaller now. "We didn't draw weapons. You just made my son afraid to play in his own street," Lisa snapped. "You made him question his worth. You made him feel like he didn't belong. You think that's not violence?" The other officer, smaller, younger, clearly shaken, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Governor," he said softly, "I believe you. I believe him. And I'm sorry, truly, this should never have happened." His honesty hung in the air, raw and rare. Lisa gave a small nod, not in approval, but acknowledgement. A small flicker of humanity. Karen shifted again. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, but her posture had changed. The arrogance had drained from her shoulders. Now there was only discomfort, exposure. She opened her mouth again. "I'm sorry," she said, but her voice lacked depth. It was the kind of sorry meant to make a problem go away, not to fix it. Lisa tilted her head. "Do you even know what you're apologizing for?" she asked. "Are you sorry that you called? Or are you sorry that it turned out you were wrong?" Karen looked down. I didn't mean for all this to happen." "That's the problem," Lisa said, voice cold now. "You don't have to mean it for it to matter. You don't have to shout slurs or wave a sign to be part of the problem. Sometimes all it takes is a phone call and a bias you don't admit." The crowd remained still, the weight of the words settling into the street. A few neighbors looked down, a few looked at Ethan. No one spoke. Then something unexpected happened. An older woman from 3 houses down stepped forward. Her name was Mrs. Harding, retired school teacher, white hair, floral apron. She had lived on that block for 30 years. "Governor Carter," she said gently, "may I speak?" Lisa turned to her, nodding slightly. Mrs. Harding walked slowly toward Ethan and looked him in the eye. "I saw what happened, sweetheart," she said softly. "I didn't call, I didn't accuse, but I didn't speak up either, and for that I'm sorry." Her voice trembled slightly. "When I saw those officers, I thought maybe they'll sort it out, but I didn't think about how you must have felt. I should have stepped outside? I should have said something. You don't deserve to be afraid just for playing basketball." Ethan didn't know what to say. No one had ever apologized to him like that, not a teacher, not a neighbor. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it felt honest. Lisa looked at the woman, her eyes softening for the first time that day. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means something." The moment opened something in the crowd. A few more neighbors stepped forward quietly, hesitantly offering words, glances, nods. Some whispered apologies. Others simply said Ethan's name out loud, as if to remind themselves he was human, a child, not an idea. Karen stood apart, unmoving, her face still flushed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't speak again. Lisa took a deep breath and turned toward the officers. "I want this documented," she said clearly. "I want a full report filed and an apology issued to my son in writing. Not because I'm the governor, but because I'm a parent. Because no child should go through this and have it swept under the rug." The officers nodded. They knew better than to argue, and then she turned to Ethan. She kneeled down so her eyes met his, and she placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were brave. Or kind. You did everything right." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to keep his chin up, even though his eyes stung. "I was scared," he said softly. "I didn't know what I did." Lisa's face broke then. For 1 second, the governor was gone. It was just a mother holding her son, shielding him with arms too small to carry the weight of a broken world. "I know," she whispered, "but I'm here. And I'll never stop being here." In that moment, something passed between them that no camera could capture. A promise, a bond. A fire lit not by rage, but by love. She stood, lifted his hand into hers, and turned toward the street. "We're going home," she said. The convoy, still parked nearby, opened its doors. But as they walked away, Lisa paused and turned back one last time. She looked at the neighbors, the officers, the lawn where it all started. "This isn't over," she said. "It's just the beginning. And every one of you needs to decide what kind of neighborhood you want this to be. One where children are feared, or one where they are safe." With that, she walked Ethan to the car and closed the door. As the convoy drove away, the silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. Karen stood on her porch, but now she was alone. Her confidence had faded, and what remained was a hollow space where certainty used to live. Ethan looked out the tinted window as the houses rolled by. The basketball still lay in the grass where he dropped it, but he didn't want to go back for it, not yet. The woman behind the sirens, the convoy moved quietly now, the flashing lights turned off, as if the storm had passed. But the real storm, the one inside Lisa Carter, was only beginning. Inside the lead SUV, Governor Carter sat in silence, her fingers gently running through Ethan's curls. His head rested against her arm, his eyes staring out the window. He hadn't said much since they left Maplewood Drive. He didn't have to. Lisa understood the language of silence. She had lived in it before when her own mother had to explain why people followed them around in stores. Why some teachers seemed quick to punish but slow to praise. Why, even with perfect manners and perfect scores, she had to work twice as hard just to be seen as normal. She had learned to hold back her anger, to bury her tears, to turn every wound into ambition. And now, despite all her success, all the rooms she had conquered, the laws she had passed, the ceilings she had shattered, it had happened to her son, in front of her, in daylight. On his own street. As the city rolled by outside, memories played like old tapes in Lisa's mind. She remembered being 11, sitting at the kitchen table in her grandmother's house in Atlanta, listening to the news announce the arrest of another black teenager mistaken for a threat. Her grandmother, wise and weary, had placed a hand on hers and said, "Baby, one day you'll change things. But the world won't give you permission. You'll have to take it with grace." That day, Lisa had promised herself she would rise. But she never imagined that rising wouldn't be enough to protect her own child from the same fear she once knew when they reached the governor's mansion. The gates opened with quiet precision. The staff stood ready, but Lisa waved them off. No photographers, no press. Just her and Ethan. She walked him inside slowly, guiding him to the small den at the back of the house. This wasn't the office with political paintings or the guest parlor where donors visited. This was the room, with old pillows, a fuzzy blanket, and a wall full of family photos. A safe room. A real one. Ethan sat on the couch without saying a word. Lisa knelt in front of him, brushing a curl away from his forehead. "Do you want to talk?" she asked gently. He shrugged. "I don't know what to say," she nodded, then sat beside him. "That's okay. Sometimes there's nothing to say, sometimes it just hurts." For a moment they sat in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward, but honest. The kind that understood. Then Ethan spoke. "Why didn't she see me, Mom?" he asked. I said, "Excuse me," I was polite. I was just getting my ball. His voice broke on the last word, and Lisa felt a sharp pain in her chest. She had faced senators, CEOs, and angry crowds. But nothing had ever hurt like this. She swallowed. "She didn't see you, baby, because she didn't want to. Some people only see what they're afraid of, even if it's not real. Even if it's a kid holding a basketball." "But I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "I know," she said. "You didn't? Then why did the police treat me like I did?" Lisa exhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Because too many people have been taught that looking like us is enough to be guilty. That being different means being dangerous. And that's wrong, Ethan. It's so wrong." He looked up at her, tears brimming. "Will it ever stop?" She pulled him close, her voice both soft and fierce. "Not unless we make it stop." And that was the moment Lisa Carter knew this wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It wasn't even just about Maplewood Drive or Karen Thompson. It was about the millions of kids like Ethan, kind, smart, full of life, who were constantly shrinking themselves to fit into a world too afraid to see them as children. She had been speaking in press conferences, signing policies, and shaking hands, but now she needed to do more, speak louder, walk deeper, lead like a mother. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, his favorite blanket pulled tight around his shoulders, Lisa sat at her desk and drafted a message, not a political one, a personal one. She didn't call her staff. She didn't wait for the morning. She opened her personal laptop, turned on her camera, and recorded herself sitting in her den, no makeup, no podium, just the rawness of a mother who had seen her child afraid. She looked straight into the lens and said, "Today my 12-year-old son was treated like a suspect on his own street. His only crime? Retrieving a basketball. He did nothing wrong. And yet he stood surrounded by officers, questioned, accused. Not because of what he did, but because of who he is. And I want every parent to hear this. If it can happen to the governor's son, it can happen to anyone's." Her voice never wavered. "This is not about politics. This is about people, about children, about fear that hides behind fences and phone calls, and it's time we confront it. Not just with policies, but with conversations, with courage, with change." She posted it with a single caption, "This is my son. And he deserves better, so do yours." By morning, the video had gone viral. In homes across the country, people woke to headlines they couldn't scroll past. "Governor speaks out after. Son mistaken for criminal. Mother, leader, witness to injustice." But what truly caught fire were the comments. Thousands of parents, Black, white, Latino, Asian, writing messages of support, heartbreak, and resolve. Teachers shared stories of students unfairly judged. Teenagers opened up about fears they never spoke aloud. And buried among them were apologies. Strangers who had never met Ethan saying, "I've been Karen, I've made assumptions. I'm learning." Maplewood Drive was never the same. The quiet street became a symbol, not of shame, but of awareness. Karen Thompson, once the self-appointed gatekeeper of her block, found herself on the receiving end of silence. Her friends stopping by. The neighbors who once shared iced tea on her porch now crossed the street instead. But the true shift wasn't punishment, it was reflection. People began asking harder questions. Parents began having tougher conversations. And slowly, without fanfare, change crept in. Lisa returned to work the next day, not with anger, but with purpose. She introduced a new community initiative called See Me First, a statewide program bringing neighborhoods together for dialogue, education, and empathy building. She visited schools, churches, community centers, anywhere people would listen, and at every stop she brought Ethan's story. Not as a symbol, but as a reminder that every child deserves to feel safe, respected, and seen. Ethan returned to school, too. Nervous at first, unsure if his classmates would whisper or joke, but something beautiful happened. They clapped for him. His teacher gave him space to share, and Ethan, still quiet, still gentle, stood tall and told the truth. "I didn't want to be famous," he said. "I just wanted to play basketball. But now I know maybe what happened to me can help someone else." He ended with a simple line, "Don't be afraid of kids like me. Get to know us." And with those words, a boy who was once too afraid to speak found the courage to lead. A crowd learns to listen. The neighborhood of Maplewood Drive had always worn its silence like a badge of honor. Fences were white, lawns were trimmed, and people waved but rarely lingered. It was the kind of street where problems were quietly ignored, where comfort was mistaken for peace, and where those who didn't fit were politely edged out without ever being told directly. For years, that silence was accepted as normal, but now it had become unbearable. The echoes of what happened to Ethan Carter didn't fade in the breeze. They lingered like smoke after a fire. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard Lisa Carter's words. But now they had to decide what to do with them. Pretend nothing happened, or finally confront the truth hiding behind their hedges and smiles. Corinne Thompson found herself trapped inside her own home, not because anyone locked her in, but because she no longer felt welcome outside of it. For the first time in years, her morning walks were canceled. Her grocery trips shortened. Her phone calls returned with distant politeness or awkward silence. Even the couple from across the street, who once trusted her to water their plants when they vacationed, hadn't spoken to her in days. Shame didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in slowly, in the way people looked away, in the hesitation of a hello and the sting of being ignored. Corinne sat by her window often, watching the street she once considered her domain. She replayed the day Ethan came for his basketball over and over, searching for anything that might justify her actions. But there was nothing, no crime, no danger. Just a child retrieving a toy. And she had called the police. It was the video of Lisa Carter, speaking not as a politician but as a mother. That broke something inside Corinne. She had watched it late. At night, alone, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She saw the pain in Lisa's voice, the strength behind her composure, and for the first time, Corinne heard the words not as a challenge but as a truth. She remembered Lisa's final question to the neighborhood before stepping into that black SUV. "What kind of place do you want this to be?" Corinne had never asked herself that before. She had assumed her role was to protect, to watch, to report. But now she realized she had been protecting her comfort, not her community. She had watched through her windows for years, but she had never really seen, across the street, neighbors were changing too. Mrs. Harding, the retired school teacher, had taken it upon herself to organize something Maplewood Drive had never done before, a community conversation, not a barbecue, not a yard sale, a gathering real, honest, raw. The invitations were handwritten and delivered by foot. She knocked on every door, looked every neighbor in the eye, and asked the same question. "Will you come? Not to defend, not to debate, just to listen." Some said yes. Others hesitated. A few closed the door quietly. But word spread. Curiosity grew. And slowly, the idea took root. The meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon under the pavilion. At the neighborhood park, the same one where Ethan sometimes shot hoops alone. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, lemonade and coffee placed on a nearby table, and a sign taped to the wall that read simply, "See me first, a space to listen." At first, people came cautiously, mothers with strollers, elderly couples, teenagers with earbuds. And eventually, even Corinne, wringing her hands, eyes downcast, took a seat in the back row. Lisa Carter wasn't there. She had been invited but declined politely, saying this was for the community to face itself, not for her to lead again. Ethan was also absent. He had asked if he had to go, and Lisa told him gently, "No, sweetheart. You've already said enough?" Still, his presence was felt in every corner of the space. Like a shadow of truth, no one could deny. Mrs. Harding stood to begin, her voice trembling but firm. She spoke not as a leader, but as a neighbor. "We've all seen what happened. We've all heard the governor's words. But this isn't about her. This is about us, about what we've ignored, about what we've allowed, and if we're honest, about what we've done." Her voice grew steadier. "Some of us think this is new, but for families like the Carters, this isn't new. It's just the first time we were forced to see it." For the first few minutes, no one spoke. Silence pressed down heavy, like the air before a summer storm. Then a young man in his 20s, Miguel, raised his hand. He lived at the end of the block. "I've lived here since I was a kid," he said. "My family's Hispanic. I remember walking home from school and being followed by a neighbor who said I looked lost. I was 10. 10 years old. I never told my parents. I thought it was just me." The room was still. Miguel looked down. "I wish I'd said something back then." Next, a white woman with a toddler on her lap raised her hand. "I'm embarrassed," she said, "not because I did something, but because I didn't. I've seen kids get watched more closely at the pool. I've heard whispers, and I didn't say anything. I thought maybe I'd make things worse, but silence is worse. Silence lets this happen." And then, finally, Karen Thompson stood. The room shifted. Everyone looked at her. Some with skepticism, others with curiosity. She didn't walk to the front. She didn't try to control the room. She stayed where she was, hands shaking, eyes glassy. "I made a mistake," she said. "No, not a mistake. That's too soft. I made a choice, a terrible one. I saw a child and didn't see a child. I saw my fear, not his truth. And I didn't just make one bad call, I did something worse. I taught my neighbors, my friends, that calling the police was the right first step. That kids like Ethan didn't belong here unless someone explained them first." Her voice cracked. "I don't know if anyone here will forgive me. I don't know if I've earned it, but I wanted to say it. Out loud, because the silence protected me. And I don't deserve protection right now. I deserve accountability." Number one clapped. No one cheered. But no one interrupted either, and in that raw stillness, something cracked open, not a redemption, but a beginning. More voices followed, some sharing stories, some offering ideas, others just saying Ethan's name with respect. The gathering lasted 2 hours. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. And for the first time, the street known for silence heard its own voice, and it sounded like healing. In the days that followed, the neighborhood changed, in small but meaningful ways. A mural was painted at the edge of the park, a child holding a basketball, standing in a field of flowers. The words above him read, "I belong here." New neighborhood signs were installed that read, "Maplewood. Strong, a community for all." Families created walking groups, neighborhood watch shifted from suspicion to support, and parents began asking their children, "What did you notice today?" Conversations that were once uncomfortable became common, but most importantly, children noticed. They saw their parents listening, learning, unlearning. And slowly the street began to feel different, not because fear vanished, but because people stopped pretending it wasn't there. Back at the governor's mansion, Lisa Carter watched the ripples with guarded hope. She didn't trust easily anymore. One incident had stolen that luxury. But when Mrs. Harding sent her a photo of the mural, Lisa stood quietly in her living room, eyes fixed on the image, and smiled, not because it erased what happened, but because it proved something had begun. Something real. She printed the photo, framed it, and placed it beside a picture of Ethan at age 5 holding the same basketball in their old backyard. "Let them see you," she whispered to the photograph, "and may they never look away again." The boy, the voice, the movement. Time had moved slowly in the weeks after that day, the day sirens pierced Maplewood Drive, the day a governor's son stood trembling with a basketball in his hand, the day a mother's silence turned into a nation's roar. But for Ethan Carter, time had also moved differently. Before, his world had been simple. Wake up, go to school, come home, shoot hoops, eat dinner, laugh with his mom, fall asleep. Now every step felt heavier. Every glance from a neighbor felt unsure. Some looked at him with guilt, some with pride, others with a strange mix of both. And at school, everything had changed. Teachers treated him a little more carefully. Students whispered his name in hallways, not in mockery, but in awe. Even his closest friends didn't quite know how to talk to him anymore. He wasn't just Ethan anymore. He was that Ethan, the boy from the video, the boy from the governor's house, the boy who made the whole country stop and listen. Ethan didn't ask for attention. He didn't crave speeches or fame or headlines. In fact, all he really wanted was to go back to being invisible, to bouncing a basketball without a crowd forming in the background. But deep down, something had changed. It wasn't just the fear that remained, it was something else. Something new, a strange sense of responsibility. At first, he tried to ignore it. He stayed quiet, nodded politely, and avoided eye contact when people said, "You're so brave." But one morning, as he sat in his social studies class, his teacher, Mr. Jacobson, wheeled in a TV card and said, "Today we're talking about leadership, and not the kind in history books, the kind that's still writing itself." He clicked play on a short news segment. There on the screen was Ethan standing beside his mother that day, face pale, arms stiff, surrounded by flashing lights. And then came Lisa Carter's words from the viral video, echoing through the classroom. "If it can happen to my son, it can happen to anyone's." The room was still. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. And then Mr. Jacobson turned off the TV, looked directly at Ethan and said, "Would you like to say anything?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He looked at the desk, his heart beat fast. But then slowly he raised his hand. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think, I would." He stood in front of the class, unsure what would come out. But then the words began to rise, not rehearsed, not polished, but raw. "I didn't want to be on TV," he said. "I didn't want to be part of the story. I just wanted to get my ball. I was scared. Really scared. I didn't know why I was being treated like I did something wrong." He paused, eyes meeting his. "Classmates. But what scared me more was how normal it felt to everyone else. Like it made sense that I was the one who had to explain myself. The room didn't move. No one whispered. No one laughed. I think we all learn stuff without knowing it, like who we should trust, who we shouldn't, who's safe, who isn't, and sometimes what we learn isn't true, but it stays in us. It changes how we see people before we even talk to them." He looked down for a second, then back up. "I'm not here to make anyone feel bad. I want us to be better. All of us. Because I don't want my little cousins growing up thinking they have to prove they belong. I don't want any kid to think being polite isn't enough, or being smart, or being kind. I just want them to be kids." Mr. Jacobson nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "Thank you, Ethan," he said, but it wasn't just a thank you. It was something heavier, something that meant, "I hear you, I believe you, I see you." That day marked something new. Not just in Ethan's life, but in the way others began to move around him. A teacher from another school reached out, then a parent group, then a youth leadership program. And slowly, carefully, Ethan began speaking not in front of huge crowds or at rallies, but in gymnasiums, classrooms, church basements, places where change actually begins. At first he kept it short, just a few words, but over time he found his rhythm. He didn't yell, he didn't preach, he told the truth, and his voice, gentle, honest, unshaken, had power. It wasn't long before Lisa Carter noticed the shift too. One evening, after dinner, she found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, writing something in his notebook. "What's that, sweetheart?" she asked, smiling. "Is that for school?" Ethan shook his head. "No," he said. "It's for the youth summit next weekend. They asked me to speak." Lisa raised her eyebrows. "They asked you to speak?" He nodded, not with arrogance, but calm confidence. "I said yes." Lisa sat down across from him, watching the boy she raised turn slowly into something more, an advocate, a light, a force. And yet still just her Ethan, still gentle, still kind, still dreaming of playing for the state basketball team. At the summit, Ethan stood on stage in front of a room full of teenagers, parents, mentors, and city leaders. He wore a white dress shirt, sleeves slightly rolled, and clutched the mic like it was an extension of his hand. His voice wasn't loud, but it was strong. "I'm not here because I'm special," he began. "I'm here because I'm tired. Tired of fear. Tired of kids like me being seen as problems before people. Tired of grown-ups not listening until something goes wrong." He paused, took a breath, and scanned the crowd. "We don't need another headline. We need heart. We need neighbors who knock before judging. Teachers who check their bias before handing out detentions. Friends who speak up even when it's uncomfortable." His words settled in the room like anchors. Change doesn't start with politicians. It starts with people. It starts with us. By the end of his talk, no one clapped right away. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because it took their breath away. When the applause did come, it wasn't loud. It was long. It was real. And as Lisa stood near the back, hand over her heart, she realized something she hadn't said out loud yet. He's leading now. And the world is finally listening. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's words were printed in local papers, shared in newsletters, quoted in morning announcements. But he didn't let it change him. He still did his chores, still practiced free throws, still asked his mom to make pancakes on Saturdays. The only difference now was that when he walked down the street, he wasn't shrinking anymore. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He was standing taller, not just because of who he was, but because of what he stood for. And something even more unexpected began to happen. Children across the state, black, white, Asian, Latino, began writing letters to him. Some said, "You made me feel brave." Others said, "You spoke the words I couldn't." One girl, age 10, wrote, "I thought I was just scared for no reason, but now I know I'm not alone. Thank you." Lisa read each letter with him. They kept them in a small wooden box under his bed, which they jokingly called the truth box. Whenever Ethan felt tired, overwhelmed, or unsure, he'd open the lid and reread a few, not to feel famous, not to feel important, but to remember that even soft voices can move mountains when they speak the truth. But for Lisa Carter, perhaps the most powerful moment came one ordinary afternoon, months later, when she visited Ethan's school unannounced. She walked through the hallway during a lunch break and found him sitting on the floor of the library, surrounded by 4 younger boys. They were all talking quietly. Ethan wasn't lecturing them. He wasn't leading a meeting. He was listening, nodding, encouraging, letting them speak. She couldn't hear their words from where she stood, but she saw it, the look in their eyes, the way their shoulders relaxed, the way they leaned in. They were learning how to be seen. And Ethan was teaching them, not by preaching, but by simply being. As Lisa stood there watching, hand on her heart, she whispered to herself, "It started with a basketball." And in that moment, she didn't feel broken anymore. She felt whole. Not because everything was fixed, but because someone had finally listened. And now, a whole generation was beginning to do the same. Karen's reflection, Lisa's mission. The seasons had changed. The air had grown cooler, and the leaves lining Maplewood Drive had turned to shades of gold and crimson, softly falling with the wind. Children still played outside, laughter still echoed in the late afternoons, and bicycles still spun their wheels on the sidewalk. On the surface, everything looked the same. But beneath that surface, something had quietly and permanently shifted. The silence that once coated the neighborhood, like a warm blanket, had been replaced, not with noise, but with awareness. People greeted each other more intentionally. Neighbors lingered longer in conversation. And more importantly, people looked one another in the eyes, not through them. It had taken time, truth, and a 12-year-old boy with a basketball to unravel. The comfort of quiet prejudice and force a community to choose whether it wanted to change. And now, as the year drew toward its close, the people of Maplewood found themselves stepping into a new chapter, not perfect, but awake, Karen Thompson had once considered herself the center of this street. Her lawn had been the greenest, her voice the loudest at HOA meetings, and her confidence unshakable. But after the incident with Ethan, her world had unraveled, not violently, but slowly, like thread slipping from a spool, exposing everything she hadn't realized about herself. In the beginning, she had tried to defend her actions quietly to herself, telling her reflection that she was only trying to protect her home, that she hadn't known who he was. But with each passing day, those excuses fell away like dead leaves. The truth had stared her down in every mirror, every silence from her neighbors, every headline. And eventually something happened that even Karen couldn't ignore. Her own granddaughter Lily came to visit one weekend and asked a simple question. "Grandma, why did you call the police on a kid like me?" That question landed like a stone in Karen's chest. Lily, whose father was black, had always been the light of her life. Karen had never thought of her as anything other than family. But Lily's voice didn't carry judgment, it carried confusion, disappointment, a quiet ache. And in that moment, Karen understood something brutal. Her fear that day had never been about danger. It had been about difference. And the child she had once feared on her lawn could have just as easily been her own grandchild in another neighborhood, facing the same suspicion, the same silence, the same pain. From that day on, Karen changed, not with a loud announcement, not with performative guilt, but through quiet, deliberate action. She began attending local equity workshops, not because someone forced her, but because she needed to understand. She read books, she listened, she apologized again, this time not for what she had done, but for who she had been. And when the community held its second See Me First event, it was Karen who helped set up the chairs and served water to guests. She didn't speak at that meeting, she didn't try to lead. She simply listened, and she stayed, and she returned the next month and the one after that. In time, people noticed. Not everyone forgave. Not everyone clapped her on the back, but they saw the change. And more importantly, so did Lily. While Karen rebuilt her understanding, Lisa Carter was building something far larger. The See Me First program, originally created for Ethan's neighborhood, had grown into a statewide movement. With support from schools, churches, law enforcement, and nonprofits, it became a model for community-led equity education and trust building. Lisa didn't want to create a brand. She wanted to create a culture. A culture where stories like Ethan's weren't just tragic exceptions, but learning moments that turned into action. Across the state, town halls opened their doors to uncomfortable conversations. Teachers received training in cultural empathy. Police departments invited youth leaders to sit at the table. And everywhere Lisa went, she didn't just speak as a governor, she spoke as a mother. Her message was always simple, always piercing. We don't need a perfect world. We just need one where a child can retrieve his basketball without fear. But Lisa knew that policy alone couldn't transform hearts. Change needed something more enduring. It needed memory. And so, she proposed one final piece to the puzzle, a statewide day of reflection, to be held annually, honoring not just her son, but every child who had been judged too quickly, seen too narrowly, treated unfairly before being known. The legislature approved it almost unanimously and named it Day of Belonging. On that day, schools across the state would pause to teach, reflect, and recommit to empathy, fairness, and seeing one another fully. When the first day of belonging came, Lisa stood at a podium inside a packed auditorium at Ethan's middle school. Ethan stood beside her, taller now, more confident, his voice still soft but no longer hesitant. Lisa spoke first, reminding everyone of where the journey began, one small mistake that revealed something much bigger, one quiet boy who became a powerful voice. And then she turned to him. "This is your story, son," she said, her voice catching. Not because of what happened to you, but because of what you chose to do with it. Ethan stepped up to the mic. He looked out at the crowd, his classmates, his teachers, strangers, supporters, even a few who once doubted him. And he smiled, not nervously, but with peace. "I don't remember every word said to me that day," he began, "but I remember the feeling. I remember what fear felt like when no one stood beside me, and I remember what hope felt like when my mom did. He glanced at her, and she gave him a small, proud nod. I used to think being quiet meant being safe. Now I know being honest is the only way to stay whole. This is not just about me. It's about the kids who never get to tell their side of the story. So if I can speak for them just a little, I'll keep going." The room erupted with applause, not thunderous but powerful. It wasn't for Ethan alone. It was for the idea that transformation was real. That change wasn't just possible, it was already happening. As the ceremony ended, students walked through an exhibit titled "The Faces of Belonging," a wall of portraits and handwritten notes from students across the state. In the center, framed under soft light, was a photo of Ethan holding his basketball, eyes wide with wonder, innocence still flickering behind the fear. Karen Thompson came to the exhibit that day, not for praise or closure, but because she needed to. She walked alone, pausing at the portraits, reading every note. When she reached Ethan's picture, she stopped. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She simply bowed her head and whispered one word: "Thank you." It was all she had left to give, and it was honest. Later that night, as Lisa and Ethan sat in the kitchen sharing leftover cake from the celebration, Lisa leaned her elbow on the counter and watched her son carefully. "Do you feel proud?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment, then replied, "I feel steady, like I'm standing on something that can't be knocked over anymore." Lisa smiled. "That's more than pride. That's purpose." He looked up at her, his face still young, but his eyes older than his years. "Thanks for believing me, Mom," he said, "even when I was scared." She placed her hand over his. "Thanks for teaching me how to listen," she replied. Outside, the streetlights glowed softly over Maplewood Drive. The ball sat on the front porch, worn but still whole. No sirens, no shouts. Just quiet. But this time the silence wasn't ignorance, it was peace, earned, chosen, shared, and somewhere in that silence, in that new calm, a voice echoed, not loud, not demanding, but steady: "I belong here."